last time. Yeah, after all the excitement to everybody, hope everybody had a good March, and it's been a while since we've been here. Items on the work session agenda for starters, for a light meeting. We'll be here for a long time. Adam, unless you're really tuned up,
Yeah.
please.
Usually the way it goes.
And might as well just, I think at this point here, we will need an executive session on the. I'm doing very narrow parameters, so. And Ford got that. Start. Ready? Incentive to stimulate construction of new residential rental housing in Nome. Councilmember Henderson is the one that's been putting something to paper on this. And what you had something that you wanted to interrupt, what do you say? Well, I'm not going to throw council member under the bus. I was there with him. We do have we do have a housing shortage here. We do have housing that is not being used. And I think some of these incentives that Scott and I looked at, I think are relatively reasonable. Obviously, the utility credit is going to have to be discussed, but over the whole, I have said to some of you, I think we are short at least 100 housing units. Doesn't mean that they're all one bedroom, one bath. I mean, I think most of them are, a lot of them are 3-bedroom, 2-bath facilities, or at least 2 bedrooms and 2 baths, because we have an awful overcrowding situation here. Plus, there is a benefit by encouraging this. It might stabilize rents, or rents even escalating even higher. But I know that, and I hate to be stepping all over your. Scott and I talked about this last week before this final presentation about how even a banker would look at some of these incentives in encouraging development. So good. We have our newest banker in town in the audience. Thank you for coming, Mr. McCann, and congratulations on your recent appointment to Northern Bank. We're excited about that. He has a shirt too? I can't see.
Northern Bank
already. Give a round of applause, guys. Scott, take us. Scott, why don't you go ahead and kind of
Broad strokes
with your. Sure. Thank you for putting this stuff in written form, so we had a little bit of a preview and could give a little thought to some of these things.
Yeah, appreciate having the work session. I've been probably driving John and Glenn a little crazy, keep asking for it every time, but so I appreciate it. So hopefully people have got a chance to take a look at it. It looks like we've got actually quite a few people in the audience, so I'm not sure if they're here for that, if that's a good thing or not. But so what I was trying to do is, we've all talked about shortage of housing. We've all talked about, costs are too high. We've talked about all kinds of things of why nobody's building any housing. As far as I know, the only program that we're doing is the city is looking at this 18 units through the teacher housing project. But as far as I know, the city has never really done anything to offer incentives to the private market, to the landlords, to the construction guys, developers, to build housing. So I thought about it and I thought, well, why aren't we building housing? And I'm sure there's actually quite a few housing experts in the room here that I'm sure they've got a lot to share. But a lot of it's, you can't recover your cost without charging extraordinary rents way beyond what the average family or individuals in Nome can afford to pay. So I tried to put together a list of incentives that the city would have some control over. I mean, there's some things the city can't control, like the ground that's constantly shifting and all of that kind of thing. But so I looked at all the fees and costs that the city charges for various things involved with building, housing units. And I tried to say, well, if we could waive some of those, or if we could delay some, or just not charge them, would that be enough to incentivize folks to take a look at building some housing units? So what I did, I basically looked at all of the fees. It was designed to not to necessarily stimulate the construction of single-family homes or anything like that, but this was to stimulate the construction of rental units, whether they be apartments, whether they be duplexes, whatever, just to stimulate the supply or the stock of available housing that could be rented out to the public. It wasn't designed to stimulate things like bed and breakfast or hotel kind of or motel kind of things, or B&Bs or Airbnb, but monthly rentals, the things that if you're moving to Nome and you have a job, like you're a teacher or a police officer or something, but you're looking for a place to stay, that's kind of the market that I was looking to affect. So basically, I mean, I try to make it pretty straightforward, by looking at, I'll just go ahead and start. So the greater the number of rental units that are created, the larger the incentive. Property tax is obviously a big part of the fees that the city collects with new housing or any type of housing. And so the idea being the more rental units that are developed or created, the longer the period that property taxes would be waived. As you can see here, if you develop up to 4 units, we'll waive your property taxes for 10 years. If you develop greater 5 through 8 units up to an 8-plex or 8 new unit rentals, we'll waive your property taxes for 15 years. And if you develop more than 8 units, then we can look at a 20-year property tax exemption. In addition, we're looking at waiving all of the fees related to construction of new rental units, whether that be a building permit. And I know there's a formula based on what that formula is, but waive the cost associated with all permits associated, whether they be excavation or fill permits or dump permits, or building permits. Also water and sewer. And yes, I did assume that the utilities is all part of the city, and so I did include potential NJUS fees into this analysis as well. I also looked at once the property's up and running. And typically when you build new properties, you've got a lot of costs. Obviously, you've got a lot of debt usually because they're probably leveraged. You've got all kinds of costs, and you're trying to make it all work. So I propose that for the first 5 years that a rental unit is in operation, that you waive essentially $100 a month per unit up to 5 years. And the idea with that is that as the landlord is trying to keep all these costs and pay all of their costs and start to develop some momentum, if you will, that they get a little break from the utilities. And I capped it at up to 8 units. And so basically, there would be, it's not a big credit, but it's enough to maybe help with offset some of those costs in the initial 5 years of the project. This wasn't designed to offset the electric fees that the tenant pays, but oftentimes when you have apartment buildings, you'll have electric fees associated with the boiler operation, some of the common electric costs of the building. There's a little typo in the bottom. What I meant to say is these incentives would not only apply to new construction, but also for the renovation of existing buildings in the rental units. For example, if somebody's got, an old warehouse or, even a single family home that they're looking at doing some changes to it, if you convert those to new rental units, to units that would add to the rental count, if you will, for the community, then these incentives would apply not just to new construction, but also to the renovation or the conversion of existing units. Maybe you've got a warehouse that nobody, you don't really use, but maybe if somebody throws a couple hundred thousand into it, they can convert it into some rental units. So these incentives would also apply to not just new construction. I threw in there that these units, once they're built, first of all, they have to be approved. By making that they do qualify for it, but they'd also have to be, once they're in operation, they would have to be certified annually to ensure that you didn't build several rental units and then we're currently using them as a B&B. That certifying that they would have to be used for longer term rentals, monthly rentals, or longer that are available to the general public. I think when you create an incentive program, you should also allow that incentive, especially if we're using NJUS utility credits or property tax exemption, that if you sell it, the remaining amounts of those benefits should transfer to the new buyer. So we should look at a mechanism to have those benefits transfer if it is sold prior to the expiration of those incentives. On the second page, I threw an example out there, and if my math wasn't 100% accurate, let me know. Because and before the Friday deadline for the packet. But I took basically, if somebody was going to build a new fiveplex, and I use these as assumed numbers, they're not based on necessarily actual cost, but it's just for the sake of discussion. You build a fiveplex, and it's going to be valued at $1.4 million, and a 12 mil property tax rate is in place, which I think what we're currently at, either 11 or 12 mils. I listed the potential savings that would accrue for a project like this. That includes the savings on the building permit. It includes any other waived permit fees associated with that construction or renovation process. I looked at this assumed sales tax savings that you get through having a building permit issued. I think most folks know how a building permit works, but you pay the city a fee to get a building permit when you're working on something, and in exchange, the materials that you buy are sold to you without sales tax. And so I threw in there some potential sales tax savings. Looking at the property tax savings at 12 mils for 15 years, that's the biggest part of the incentive. In this particular example, it's $250,000 over 15 years. Utility credits, again, just based on a 5 point. Looking at this, I wanted to show that, at least for this example, between when you look at all of the savings for between utility credits and property taxes and sales tax exempt construction materials, you're looking at about $360,000. So that's not a small number, but I wanted to show that I think if you add enough incentives, it becomes significant enough where potentially property owners or developers or contractors will look at this and says, maybe this does make sense. And then the last part of it were highlights of the program. I've heard a number of concerns about, for example, the teacher housing project that, the city, even if you are able to get grant funds, the city will have to continuously spend money to subsidize these, whether they're in the terms of subsidized rents to keep them affordable enough so that the average teacher or police officer can afford them. They're not spending any money on this. This is all based on new construction, new activity. It potentially incentivizes, we've got a lot of buildings around town that they may be in good shape, but they're not really being used for anything. And this, by adding these incentives, might encourage the owners to look at either developing them themselves or maybe selling them to somebody that is interested in developing new housing. It may also create some incentives for folks that have either, I shouldn't say abandoned, but vacant buildings that aren't being used for anything. They might look at this, or somebody might look at this and say, what? It makes sense for me to develop it or sell those to somebody who is interested in developing new housing. And it potentially, if we're able to just stimulate interest in construction, it may allow NJUS to use further the additional interest or incentives to secure funding to expand the NJUS utility grid, which is obviously sometimes a big limitation on new housing development. And as I indicated at the end, it will, this does not require the city to spend really any money fund this housing. It's creating the incentives, which I think is really important for government to do, to stimulate activity instead of actually having to become the builder, the developer, and incur all of those costs. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I haven't. I've had a chance to talk with this to a few people, not as many as I wanted because we kind of did it all on fairly short notice. But there's been support, at least for the folks that I've talked to do this. And whether or not this is enough to create a bunch of construction activity, I think it will certainly start the discussion on something. And I really like it because it doesn't cost the city a dime. Eric.
Well, we'll change from me going first to me going last.
I personally like everything about it, but I'd like to change the very first number in that list from 2 to 4 units to 1 to 4 units.
I thought about that. With
Yeah.
the mother-in-law apartment, you're absolutely right.
Well, and also we have like, I don't know, maybe Brian remembers or Gerald when they brought out that list of how many vacant properties we have in town, but we have a lot. Single family vacant places or whatever that would make good rentals if they had the incentive to do it.
I tailored some of this from, I don't know if you read it in the ADN here, there was a big write-up on it a month or so ago about, they call them, I think they're called accessory dwelling units, basically mother-in-law apartments. And they're doing something similar in Anchorage. Obviously, their housing's a lot more dense there, but people that have, to encourage them to add on, may not be a lot of space to build new units, but people can add on to existing units. So it's, some of the stuff that's down here is kind of modeled off of that program.
That would be fair because the person who might stick $100,000 into one place to renovate it to make a smaller unit nice is going to get a certain benefit from that, prorated compared to somebody who's going to stick something into 4 units. I mean, you're going to get a benefit. So, but it still might be enough incentive to.
I agree.
I can give you my thoughts.
Sure.
I like the general idea. I'm not sure if, completely waiving taxes for 20 years is the route I'd go.
Why not?
It's just an awful long time. I mean, typically, when the city sells property, they historically have put covenants on that they have to go on the tax rolls. I mean, we won't even allow somebody to buy it and put it into a nonprofit status because the reason we're putting the property up for sale is to get it on the tax rolls. So having an income producing property that's not contributing to the operations of the city through property tax 20 years just seems like a bit of a stretch. What I would maybe propose to change it a little bit is to have a sliding scale. So it's 100% the first year or the first 5 years, whatever, and then it goes to 75%, and then 50, and then 25. Just to kind of gradually go in there. That way, 15 years down the road, suddenly have to put a big spike in your rents because now you got to pay property tax. Whereas if it's kind of gradually phased in, just thoughts. I'm not saying that these are or whatever. The other things, a lot of the fees are based on the city cost to oversee or whatever, especially with building permit, because you're on staff.
Yes, we do 24 hours a week.
Okay. is there's times when we contract out to an entity in Anchorage or wherever to fulfill that role. So they're paid on an hourly basis. And they have to be up on all the codes and everything. They have to evaluate the plans. They have to inspect the commercial properties, especially to make sure that they're being constructed to code. So there is a cost involved. Frequently exempt dump fees. I don't think that's a big deal. Excavation permits, I don't think there's a whole lot of city staff time involved in those. So some of those are fine. The sewer and power hookup fees can be pretty significant. And those are direct costs of the city. So if the goal is to not have the city spend any money up front, then it's not true there. But I'll be quick on the rest of it. Then the electric fees, I think there's when we approved the fees for electric utility and whatnot, it's pretty much on a break even. And it doesn't even cover depreciation for the most part. So that I go along with providing a discount for electric at below cost. But I mean, the biggest thing is the property tax exemption anyway. And I think that's the the other thing, and I'm not trying to nitpick here, but I'm sure you're aware that the materials cost for a building construction is about 30% of the total, right? 30 to 40%. Labor is a really big chunk. So if you've got a $1.4 million building, you've probably got 400,000 in materials. Like I said, that's not it just changes your benefits numbers. But those are just the thoughts I had. And I was also wondering, why we wouldn't want to extend it to the single family housing. I think we've got a couple entities in town that do a pretty good job of the housing authority and who's the other one? Anyway, there's entities that provide incentives on single family stuff. Both rental and rent to own kind of thing. But I wouldn't be opposed to the same kind of package deal for new or renovated single family. One other thing that keeps popping in and out. I'll bring it back.
Yeah, so I kind of like the idea of a sliding scale as well. That just seems like a really long time for us to not potentially be collecting revenue, when I feel like we could always use the revenue, any revenue we can generate, but trying to strike a balance between that incentivizing. I'd also be curious because I think obviously having housing in and of itself is an issue, but I think affordable housing is the other component of it. And so I'd be curious how this might play into creating, because I feel like if we don't have a certain amount of inventory from on the market, it's not gonna lower rent costs across the board. So you would still have people potentially saying, oh, well, this unit over here on the side of town, it costs this amount of money for this many bedrooms, and so we're gonna charge that even though we got this incentive and our costs for building were lower. I don't know that I just necessarily wanna go a rent control route or what it would look like, but I do worry because even if we have inventory on the market for people to rent, I think some people are still just not gonna be able to afford it at all. I was just trying to think through how that might play out. Because I mean, say we get a fiveplex out of it, I mean, that's great. I will take whatever housing we can get in this community. But if they're still charging the same amount that a lot of units are in this community, I'm just trying to think, maybe there's a different avenue that we tackle that. So I'm not saying that I would by any means not support this because I do. And then I would just be curious what NJUS's input is. I
I could make one comment. I mean, it's a really good point about just because you have more houses, does that mean it's going to be any cheaper? And the idea is that, you know, the more housing we can create, the greater the supply of housing, and that will essentially drive down the cost of rents. And that was sort of my idea behind the 20-year or the longer-term property tax exempt timeframe. Because the longer you can keep those tax exempt incentives alive, the easier it will be for the landlords to keep the rents lower. And once we start increasing their cost burden, then it will be. The key to this, in my mind, is creating as much inventory as we can. That's the idea. And that's why I will agree, they're very generous incentives. But if we get a lot of interest and we get a lot of people interested in building that housing, and we can create these long-term incentives, it will help to keep the rents that they will charge lower for a longer period of time.
mean, is
So it's theory.
would it I don't even know if this is all of this plays out, but like if we did have a sliding scale, is there a way for us to say you can't increase rent beyond a certain amount or I like the idea of a sliding scale, but I could see how that would impact landlords raising rent. The whole idea is just we need more affordable housing. I mean, if it panned out the ways that we would hope it would and created a bunch of units, absolutely I could see that driving prices down. But I think if it was only just a couple or smaller units, or even just people remodeling their homes. Like I mean, like that's why I have a mother-in-law unit in my home. Is I was the only house I could afford in town. And I mean, it's not that I need help with my mortgage. It's just I know housing is short, and I felt like I had a responsibility having a house that was too big for me that I should portion off a bit of it, because there are so few options. So, and I specifically rent one because it's a rent house and it's. Yeah, I mean, I could. I'm just trying to calculate mentally, thinking about town, how many single home out there could potentially do that. Um, this is also a little bit tangential, but so in my is actually really focusing on housing right now. So they put together a survey. They're trying to find out like how many people on average live in a home. What is the average cost to rent versus to have a mortgage and all of these things. So it's. I really wish Paris was here because I think this is very much on youth people's mind. Because they're thinking about going off to college and coming back, and how is that going to be affordable? I mean, one, how are you going to get a job, and two, how are you going to get housing? I definitely think we need something in place, and I'm grateful to
The property tax exemption, um, it should be for the increased valuation. So, I mean, so you don't have a 300,000 square foot lot that somebody puts a duplex on and then wants property tax exemption on the entire lot. So it'd be on the increased value, correct?
Yeah, the idea was if somebody say had like, we're talking, if you already have a house, and it's maybe say it's a $350,000 house, and then you add, 100,000 and you add a mother-in-law apartment, then the additional amount, that 100,000 would be, would theoretically be
Right.
not the full house.
That makes sense. The rents, like, I don't really see the city getting into rent control. I think rents are going to be market based. Supply and demand has a big impact. I think what would end up happening is older units. The new stuff would be more attractive. They'd have higher rents. Um, they'd get filled faster, et cetera, et cetera. There'd be less competition for the old stuff, and that would naturally reduce the rents on that. And I'm not saying that people that can't afford, brand new stuff don't deserve to have adequate housing, but laws that stipulate the minimum standards for rental housing. But those older units are just naturally going to be less expensive, and I think they'll drop in price. Existing units will drop in price, which will make it harder for those owners to break even. But the new stuff, this should allow those developers to make a profit, and that's their incentive to construct is the profit motive. That's just the way capitalism works. So, which um, I don't see. I'm only one person here, but I don't see rent control on the city's agenda in the future.
Let's just finish, the two
Don't have
people here.
anything different to say than these
Okay.
guys.
Doug, did you have
This is
anything?
great, I appreciate you doing this.
And
It's a
the only
great
thing I can
discussion.
say is one of the potential revenue increases that you're gonna see from that is you're gonna now be able to. If there's any ability to do something to stretched out over a time period, is there some way to capitalize that early in the process to make those revenues?
A suggestion for the idea of the sliding scale and figuring that out. You know, the market is what it is, and a landlord should be able to charge what they want. But perhaps you could make the in order to qualify for, in your annual recertification, to say that you still get that incentive, base that on charging not beyond a fair market rent for Nome, which for a 2-bedroom house is or a 2-bedroom apartment, $1,685 a month. For a 3-bedroom apartment, $2,100 a month. I mean, that's not an unreasonable rent for a place, by definition. Um, if somebody's going to get incentives and then charge $4,000 a month for their apartment, well, then what do they need the incentive for? They're getting $48,000 a year per unit.
Thank you. Ms. Mo back there wanted to say something, I think.
I just wanted to ask Matt, does that data include landlords are picking up school costs? So does the fair market rents that you're looking at? Because typically, when you see that fair market rent number, it's for the house itself. It's not including trash pickup or electric or fuel. And in Nome, the norm is for the landlord to pay the fuel. And that's a huge cost. Your information.
Where it's come from? Because that's, I would love to see more about that.
It's a HUD formula thing.
Okay, and that's like rural Alaska specific or?
There's, yeah, they figure it out for everybody. That's what the home. That's
Okay.
exactly-
Because I like that idea. I really like that. I'm glad you brought that up. With the other factors of like whether oil or other things might be accounted for. It would also be nice if we could, you know, I'm trying to English today and I'm not doing it very well. But making sure that homes are a higher level of energy efficiency or just thinking about environmental impacts too, if there's a way to kind of build in.
Else back there want to comment on this? Go ahead. He said, go ahead, Ken.
Thank you for speaking up.
Ken Morton on behalf of your Nome Joint Utility System. So some thoughts related to the NJUS incentives. NJU is not an organization that has a profit. We collect revenue for utility services provided, and that revenue pays for the operation and maintenance of the system. Pretty much the bulk of our construction that we've had to date has been grant funded. We're just not really funded to extend utility systems the way we're currently structured, noise change rates. Back when we had regular grants, we had a construction crew that came back every summer. And they built water, sewer, infrastructure. That grant funding probably went away somewhere mostly around 2015, I want to say. We had a bit of a brief resurgence in 2017, but it's gone. The equipment that the utility had for that program has been accessed, and the personnel that we were getting back every year, again, they're not there. So the people that we have that can do water and sewer, they're doing operation and maintenance. They're repairing leaks. They're jetting the issues. So a building is added to existing mains at this point. It's a contractor that's doing the install, whether it's Emmons or whether it was the contractor that the state had or Winkleman or maybe a couple of others. The utility's involvement in that is we do an inspection at where the connection is made. We typically do not charge for that service. There is not a connect fee for water, sewer, or power unless there is. Generally isn't. I would guess, looking at our old construction records, that it costs about order of magnitude, maybe $50,000 to extend water and sewer services to existing mains. And if you're going to extend new water and sewer main out in the street to serve an area that's not served, like 6th Avenue and East of N Street, I would probably use about $1,000 a foot to extend that water and sewer main. Let's see. On the power side, if you're building a house and you're next to an existing line that NJU has, NJU's tariff provides for a pole, a transformer, and secondary conductors. And that's not something that we currently charge for. If we need to extend primary, it's somewhere in the range of, who knows what it is this year, but call it $6,500 per pole. So that's the range of $25 to $30 per foot. And we do charge for that. Starlink, Bring Air's hangar that was constructed this summer. A few other improvements. We do charge for those. Other thoughts? The city owns NJU, but the city pays NJU for the utility services that the city receives. Got meters on every building that the city has, and the city makes payment and it pays for that service. Similarly, NJU pays for the cost of utility services that we receive. We actually use quite a bit of power to generate, to pump water, lift stations, and the utility bills itself for those services. So where would incentives come from? Model is, it would be the city. That's what I'm accustomed to seeing. Like the streetlights, the city pays for streetlights. Power, we do the operation and maintenance, but it's really the city that foots the bill. Do a little bit, the Christmas lights. We don't charge for electricity for those. We don't charge for supporting Iditarod, a few things like that. But for the most part, it's all a cash balance, dollar balance system, and there really is no excess. So where could the revenue come from to pay for the utility incentives? Utility provides about $250,000 per year to the city under the pilot. Payment in lieu of taxes. There's been there. We collect sales tax on behalf of utility services provided throughout. There's potentially a revenue source. But without a basic rate structure change, I'm not seeing where there's a whole lot of room within the existing books the way they're structured right now. Do you have any questions on any of that?
I do. So I would assume that, I mean, frankly, how much of a burden if we create, just from this program alone, 10 units? I don't see that as a big cash draw on the utilities. I think, and I am looking at NJU and the city being the same entity. I know they're structured and organized. It's all the same pot of money from my perspective. And to look at, it's like any other cost. If we look at incentives, the city will be able to budget and say, okay, we've developed 20 new units. Boy, we got teachers coming here. We got police officers coming here. We've solved all kinds of other problems, revenue generating or not. But it becomes a budgeting issue. These incentives will cost X amount a year, and we budget just like any other expense. But I think the value that the city is creating through programs like this, if we've got 20 more units, and I think that potentially could be an understatement. All of the other benefits that we're going to generate out of there, increased business, increased people living here, more people living here, there's more people shopping at the grocery store, there's more people paying sales tax, there's all kinds of things. So you kind of got to build it and they will come. I think that the cost that we may be waiving, if you will, it's going to be an expense like any other expense that we have. But I think the benefits, financial and otherwise, will far surpass the cost that we have to do in terms of waiving it. I mean, we're not waiving utility costs, and it's coming out of an existing pot of money. This is all based on future development, theoretically. So that would be, yes, it's going to be an expense, but I think we got a drastic problem. And I think the city needs to look at how we can create incentives. And this is probably the quickest way to do it. So.
It's just a couple other.
The new banker has a.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I think you guys also Fairbanks did something similar to this where they did 1 to 4 units at 2 years, property tax exemptions at 5 years plus a 10 years exemption. My kind of fear with, and I think we do need the single family homes as well, but looping 1 to 4 units together and providing 10 years exemption, I think we're going to roll out a lot of single family unit homes, and it's going to take a smaller bite out of this larger problem than if we had something like, and just for example, 1 to 2 at 5 years, 2 to 4 at 10, 5 to 8 at 15, and 8 up at 20, just to provide that much more room for larger units while still identifying that single family homes are important and we need them and incentivizing them too. I just fear grouping them together with 1 to 4 units, we're going to have a lot of 1 units and not a lot of 4 units. In the end, it'll probably wash out, maybe, but a quicker solution to a housing problem would be to have a lot of units.
Rent. So I don't know how many people are going to be building 1-bedroom or 3-bedroom houses specifically for the purpose of rent.
Or renovation, right?
Anybody else back there? Rhonda?
I just want to say it's been my experience that tenants mostly pay the electric. The landlords do pay the fuel, so I don't know to a builder that an electric incentive would be a big draw. If the intention would be for the tenants to pay their own electric.
There's usually a house meter though, that the like outside lights and if there's interior hallways or corridors or
Boiler systems are usually
boilers and that kind of thing. So I can see it. I don't personally agree with giving the discount, but on the utilities because it does cost money to produce electricity. But that's where that would come in. Is the house meter.
I guess just a couple of comments on that. There are some covenants that are in place on revenues. Not supposed to give it away, and that's why there's a thing that specifically says the city will vote for it. That the city can't just be to see what the PCE program could be impacted because that's another little deal out there. But I mean, I guess those are the things, and you know, I guess when I looked at comments on the thing, not that one makes a difference necessarily because electric does to some degree support water and sewer, but the electric stuff pretty much is on a meter. You know, I mean, you click off a meter side of it. You know, you're still supposed to pay and charge. You know, uniformly on the deal, but I would not see investing at all. Sewer, maybe that's another thing. Just as far as the hookup deal, Ken said, you know, I mean, if we actually charged a hookup fee, we don't do it. Basically, it's here's a new customer, great, we're glad to have you, type of thing, and people are you know, whether it be to you know, funds or demonstrate development or these other people that are coming out and putting a service in for them. That is costs that they're just covering directly. The utility, you know, sells materials to the contractor to be able to put these but it really is not worked up much. There's a 10% admin fee on the thing, for going out there and having to, yank it out of the yard and put it on a truck and all that other stuff, but there's not a lot associated with that. Years ago, there was a deal with folks having something called an A-base meter. An A-base meter was something where the wires connected directly into your meter box and there was no breaker. And so that was and if you pulled the meter off, it didn't change the fact that the power was going on into the house. So that became a safety concern with the fire department. So the utility actually did go financing those things so that the to do the upgrade, that it was a 36-month just based on the bill, no interest. People were able to pay that back so that they didn't have to. We needed it done. So rather than having them to have to do that stuff, it was safety issue, and that was some of these things. I mean, that there may be some thing there where maybe the city isn't the bank, but some kind of a something that because that's a big upfront cost for folks, and the yeah, I think this is definitely an idea that's worth merit. Um, Thanks for clarifying that it would apply to renovations and not just new construction, because I had read that. Um, and we're doing this only for tolls as opposed to um, single family home for sale. Certainly, I think we'd love to see people in the coming in here and buying a house and being a part of the community and generating some equity as opposed to simply renting. But it's not part of this, but I think it's worth at least talking about. The and clarification that it's the increase only, it's not current costs. Um, some of this is to reduce the rates to people in addition, or is that not a consideration?
Oh, it's absolutely a consideration.
Okay, so if that's a consideration that we're waiving property taxes for 10 to 20 years, and some of these other fees, it struck me that assume that most of these things are on a depreciation schedule with the IRS, so there's a tax benefit that's coming as a result of that. That is on I don't know, is it on a 20-year or 27 and a half year thing? So that by the time, we turn around and start charging property taxes, a couple decades from now, and the tax credits run up, we may be keeping rents low today, but it seems like the potential that they're going to shoot up
result of, several factors. Just another thing to mention. Yeah, the idea that Sig brought up of putting an energy rating with this, that sounds like a cool way to go and address things. I think some 0-star properties never can be made to 5-star, but
There is no energy rater in Nome right now.
right.
That's usually handled through the financing process.
What's that?
That's usually handled through the financing process.
And so essentially, the city is ending up on a roundabout way being part of the financing process through these deals. So being able to tie that in, if you don't, build something that goes from a 3 to a 5-star on the thing, maybe you don't get the same, if you only go up 1 star, maybe you get one level. If you go up 2 stars, you get something more. Just another way to look at it. And I guess maybe we don't care who builds all these things. We just want them built. And can't help but think those with deeper pockets and better credit at this point in time could do it without these incentives. And are we? It sure would be nice that we could not just potentially. Let everybody in the community be able to do it, I guess. Whether it's resources or it's just might be another way for them to improve their own situation and in that process. And then I think the final thing was, again, do we care who does this? This just in the sector, or are we wanting to give government programs?
So if I could address the government section, I indicated, and I was trying to figure out a way to put it, but basically it needs to be open to the general public. So, and not to pick on anybody's project, but say for example, a homeless project, that is very specifically limited to a certain, a segment of the housing market. And typically, the government programs have their own money. This program is designed specifically to stimulate private sector investments, and because I believe that's what's missing in this community. We have a number of government, sponsored programs, whether they're low income, whether they're home. A lot of that, and I'm sure folks would want to see more of that. But this program is tailored specifically to stimulate private sector development of housing. I would pause when we start looking at trying to create more and more limits, whether it be energy efficiency on this program. Energy efficiency, it's great to have, but does it really matter? We're creating additional housing in Nome. Yes, it's good to have. Yes, it reduces your cost, and hopefully that incentive, whoever's developing that housing will look at that to keep their operating costs lower. But I think the more that we start to trade to, whether it's controlling the amount of rent that folks charge, the energy efficiency is good. The more that we sort of try to define more and more what this housing should look like, beyond what is legal and what the building code requires and so forth, I think we're straying a little bit far from the target. I think that to answer John's point about do we care who builds housing, I think it absolutely should be open for a guy that, or, you know, a family that owns their house and wants to create some additional units in their backyard or, you know, some other, absolutely. You know, we should absolutely offer incentives. I mean, if you think about it, if people, you know, like this program, you may have builders, mom and pop, professional builders, whatever, going to the local building suppliers and saying, look, there's some pretty good incentives here. Let's negotiate some building materials for the local building suppliers to provide for these projects. So it stimulates a lot of that. So to answer your question, we should be encouraging everybody to build it. One of the things I've heard is, you know, we need to expand the utility, sewer, and water grid to build more housing. I'm not convinced that that's the case. We have a lot of what I would call underutilized properties, vacant buildings, raw lots, so forth. This will have everybody taking a look at that and say, maybe we can take advantage of this and use additional properties for it. So I guess to answer your question, John, I don't really care. Certainly want to provide as many incentives so local owner builders can do it, local contractors, absolutely. But at this point, everybody has said this is one of the biggest critical shortages in Nome, and drastic problems require drastic solutions sometimes.
And I guess, you know, it wasn't contractors versus you or me on the thing, but it was, you know, that are out there. And I mean, we can take it to the thing about gravel. Recently, you know, how much did our tariff really make a difference on, you know, whether another, you know, couple thousand yards of stone went out? And yeah, but it, those things are from government, and so, you know, for just a private, you know, I mean, there aren't two, you know, you don't need to be able to seawall up on Anvil in front of your place, so you're not gonna, you know, you wouldn't be impacted, but the you know, it's going to be a, you know, a state project or a federal project, you know, to put a seawall in just RAF. So, if there's some government program, um, yeah, I mean, maybe we do want to give incentives to all of us collectively, but I don't see our tax bills going down.
Well, I think I understand your point, but I would respond that, I mean, the whole goal of this is twofold, two goals. Create additional housing stock and bring the cost down to what most folks would consider an affordable level. When you have more supply of housing, we've talked, you know, Glenn has said we could be potentially 200 housing units short, you know, whatever that number is, the more units we put out there, you know, it's still a competitive issue, you know, and those rents will come down. And, you know, I mean, so it's a little bit different from the gravel where you have gravel being exported to some other project versus, because keeping the cost down for those gravel projects is not a goal, at least for the contractor, or at least for where the end users are. Keeping costs down here, that's a big goal. And that's how I'd answer that.
I've said enough here. I think it's hard to get people to do stuff. Kenny?
I was very interested in Doug's comment there. I was kind of thinking about the same thing. Is that what are some of the non-monetary items that could be barriers to three of them there. I know one of the things that comes up all the time in the planning commission is the parking situation, folks trying to get around that, especially considering the substandard size of some of our lots. And one potential solution I just wanted to throw out would be if some of these areas we could identify some lots with buildings that could perhaps be abated or purchased by the city to be then developed into public parking spaces that we could allot to the lots around that immediate area so that the full size of the lot could then be used for construction as opposed to having to have some of that go off towards parking spaces. That would be else related to things. And once that initial expenditure was made by the city, maintaining a public pretty good at doing that side of the moment. That was that and the lack of really hard data. Heard to hear all of what you had to say. Um, more hard data on what you're going to acquire that. But I also wonder, have there been any conversations with developers specifically about what they perceive as the barriers, other than being just about the cost, which is of course the obvious thing, but not sure how to survey.
I'm not aware of any, but
If I could address that, and I've had general conversations, not about these specific initiatives, but over the years, both when I was a banker and in my current job, and the number one issue, but you can't recover your costs. You can't without charging exorbitant rents. You know, it doesn't make sense. You know, you to spend, you know, $1 million on a project, and after 30 years, you still can't get your money back because it costs so much money to develop it. And then, you know, the few developers around that have built new recently and then start charging rents, we've all seen what those rents are really high because they have a lot of costs to deal with. So, from my perspective, it's all about if there was an attractive environment for developers, owner builders themselves to do it, they would be doing it. The numbers just don't make sense right now. The whole idea here is reducing the cost, reducing the upfront cost, reducing the operating cost, the recurring cost. What the city's limited in what it can do, including the utilities. We're very limited on what we can do, and I'm looking at just about every revenue source that that city and NJU makes on construction and buildings, and look at that and try to make it. You know, I think that's so. Yeah, it's not being able to get a return on your investment.
Go that 100%. I mean, I've looked at building projects. I developed plans while I was in the Straits for a large complex with all the amenities. I mean, the bank shut it down basically because they wouldn't loan money on it because it wasn't gonna make sense. Yeah, as far as you have to charge too much.
I heard from a local landlord, I guess this weekend, that goes and finds dilapidated places and renovates them with the idea of renting them out and then selling them after a few years. That's kind of their plan, and that's what they do. And they said an incentive, and even more so, they said that it was an incentive to see that the city is actually open for business. That we're trying to do something to encourage development and not put roadblocks up, or their perception that we're putting roadblocks up just by having a normal fee that one would have. But that was kind of they said that alone will be a big incentive. were favorable. They looked through this thing. They were pretty favorable. They had one other suggestion. They said that the city owns a lot of property that we try to sell all the time, and we can't seem to unload it, probably because of the reasons for the different building costs or whatever. And that if we want to unload some of the property, we put it out there for free with the idea that somebody has to build a rental unit on it. And give, I think that's the incentive to get that way. More rental properties, basically.
Well, um, a lot of perceptions out there that are not fact. And I think that's been the biggest problem that we've had. When I was talking with Scott, we were looking at programs that have already been started in Pennsylvania because to innovate. We don't have all the taxes, thank God, they have in Pennsylvania, which, you know, you can reduce those taxes or make it an incentive. But I do think that if you're going to look at doing this, that you set a term on this. Most of these programs in Pennsylvania have 3, 5, 10-year programs, and that way, let's say you use the number of 3 years, you come back and reevaluate to see if it has worked well or not. It also incentivizes those that want to do it to step up now, knowing that it might not be renewed after 3 years. I feel very strongly about it meets building codes and some type of energy code. So, you know, if you're going to become more energy, they need to look at something another that's going to be I've seen in this community, updating our building codes. Vendor is saying, what's your building code? And we say, I believe it's 2009, and their company, their banking, or whoever their financing is looking at 2018 building codes because it includes the energy efficient requirements. And I always want to think what Gerald says. Yes, it may include how many nails are put into the boards for safety purposes. So I think that should be in this. Now, tonight we were hoping to have 2 discussions. One is on elections, and the other was this. So if you all don't have, Scott and I sit down again, because we've spent at least 5 to 6 hours discussing these issues, and maybe come back, oh yeah, it's been that much, come back and look at this and fine tune it a little bit for another work session, and hopefully within a very short period of time. A couple of weeks. Yes, sir. The thing is, we might add because spending utilities is so expensive that some of the properties that we can't sell are actually down. Some of those properties, I've just finished speaking to John, drainage field. And until you come down there and address those drainage issues, you may not wanting to be selling those properties. And that was a comment that he made. But we are selling every property, and maybe we put into this, if this program starts, they have to be constructed on the existing grid.
As a property owner with property in town, with about 30 acres, definitely on it's definitely been looking at that recently. down the NJUS credits, you know, I would advocate for adding a line item in the budget for incentives. And it's like they do their own utilities, they're then paying NJUS for these incentives. So, okay, we had 2 people get incentives this month, we're gonna pay NJU for those amounts. Adding it in the budget, because, you know, yes, it's adding a line item, but how many housing, you know, how many other expenses? So, okay, let's shift expenditures to an incentive program. Benefit in the long run because we're gonna have more housing. In the budget for the budget or the benefit is
Around the table, comments?
I think we also need to do the building code stuff too.
Say that you meet code, including requires you to get an inspection, which you don't have an inspector for, but honestly, that's another person that's skilled into town, you know.
Yeah. Have a residential building inspector. I think he's even getting his energy certificate.
Good enough. Well, I think we should just,
I mean, we put it off for a year. I mean, we keep pushing it. I think there's some reluctance to even talk about it. Now is for the people around this table to really think about how do we increase the participation in government? What can we that would more likely that people are going to become interested in actually sitting at this table, or the school board, or the utility board, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, every year, we've got 2 seats up, and typically there's 2 people on the ballot, 1 for each seat. Because nobody wants to run against anybody. When somebody announces their retirement, like when Stan did, then you've got 2 or 3, 4 people throw their names in the hat. Perception that they're trying to unseat somebody. Perception that the incumbent has a big advantage, which is true. Let's just not have single seats assigned. Make the seats at large kind of concept. I mean, that's, I think a large percentage of the town is comfortable with voting that way, to where you have 5 names on the ballot, you vote for 2, the 2 highest vote getters get on the board.
what's the opposition to that? I don't understand that.
Tried to do
Right. We had it, but that was because it was just like we were trying to do it.
So, as I'm reading.
You can't twice, you can't say 2 votes for this person. I mean, so it would vary from how the native corporations do it in that manner, but seats A and B are up, okay? So you have 5 people interested in a seat on the council. So you have 5 names for city council, not 1 name for seat A and 1 name for seat B. You'd have, 3 or 4 or 5 people that throw their names in for a seat. Top 2 get, and we proposed ordinance drawn up and the whole bit. So, I mean, we looked at all the various scenarios, how runoffs would be handled, all that kind of stuff. But like I say, that met opposition. It was 9 months ago or thereabouts, yeah. Yeah.
Too
True
much
here.
into the weeds, that's why.
That could be.
I mean, there are too many.
Petition from the citizens as well, a couple of people, that I think gave some of us around the table an excuse to say no. So that's one option that's been looked at. Another thing that was suggested, I mean, it didn't get a whole lot of action or anything, but it was a comment that was made was to split the town into 6 precincts. And then, I mean, this is going the total opposite direction of the other one, but to go 6 precincts, then you have 1 person elected from each of the 6 precincts. And that might generate more interest. Okay, more precincts than we have now. I mean,
More or less.
the from their neighborhood. So you have a representative from that neighborhood. Interest in voting. I'm not sure. Levels or not. I mean, it's worth thinking about. So whether that's 6 or 3 or 2, I mean, the existing 2 precincts to have three people from each precinct, and you're electing precinct 1 is electing 1 person, precinct 2 is electing 1 person each year, and that way you don't have, like, if you got a lot more people in precinct 1 that actually vote, you might have both representatives coming out of that neighborhood. If you've got it, where this comes in a lot of times is when you're thinking about pretty representation on a board or council, and where you've got neighborhoods that are predominantly one ethnic group versus another. So in order to make it fair representation, you, so a representative required on the board or council. That's where, getting into the more precincts would come advances that theory. Something that pushing. Nome actually went the other direction and just combined it all into. They just ignore the fact that there's two precincts and just combine the entire town into basically one precinct that elects representatives. These were the three that I came up with. Three options, but I really want the rest of you to think about, what you think would stimulate more participation in voting. Think I don't think anyone here at the table is really gonna be thinking about participation because I might lose my seat. Just want to get that out there. Pretend that this is my last term. Up another issue of term limits. Do they make sense? What would they be? Anticipation that we would come to a conclusion tonight. It was just throw it on the table and get people to think. And I think we do need to have another work session that's just dedicated to this issue, and that we're not going to spend the whole time talking about something else and try and do this in 5 or 10 minutes.
That's been the representation on this council. It's not reflected necessarily. I just want to see an election system that encourages diversity within the region. It's really frustrating sometimes, and I honestly think about resigning a lot. It's a big thing that I get told is that they finally have somebody who looks like them. Somebody who looks like them, who has the same history as them, value systems, culture as them. I just want to come up with an election system that promotes. I'm not laying blame at anybody's feet or saying that the people here shouldn't be here because I feel very honored to work.
See in all the years that I've sat here.
And Jennifer.
Right. Sorry, we're belabor at this point, but we do spend fully. And stuff of the Nome code section. Print those out and distribute them. to sort through the Alaska statutes on the thing.
Mm-hmm. Be helpful when we have a work session.
It's here to stretch our legs and, here a little flavor of that. Still like the Carter, okay.
Two for me.
So you don't have, you don't want to do 6 each one. They would all be, I mean.
You'd be staggered.
You'd stagger them. So, yeah. I actually looked at trying to get an idea of where. The neighborhood, not greatly, but pretty short. Sidewalks, I mean, that- We'd have to carve it up and just like people in the state. Say within grade 1 and grade. And carve up the district.
You know, that's that.
The only thing
Girl said that. It's mosquito.
Step in that direction, but it's not. Having a conversation. I don't understand.
Insurance is the biggest. Well, I mean, when I worked for Bering Straits, I had full.
Jalapeno, one garlic, so you either way.
I think Brian.
He doesn't get,
His strategy is short.
he always gets a veggie.
I guess a great idea. Anything I'd like to see. More seconds.
I'm good.
$7:15 and we'll call it 28th, 2022. Clerk, when you call the roll.
Member Henderson. Here. Councilmember Doug Johnson. Here. Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Martinson. Here. Cook. Youth Representative People is excused. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Moving on to approval of agenda. Agenda before us. Simply to note that person, Councilmember Brown. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Henderson. Councilmember Doug Johnson. Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcott. Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to approval of minutes. We have February 28, 2022 regular and March 7th special meeting minutes. Objection will take these together and ask for a motion. Councilmember Topcott.
Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martin. Yes. Councilmember Topcott. Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next, moving on to communications. We have a communication. Spoke up. And, I wanna thank reports within the community, and she also solicited and received Foster. So I see Fagerstrom. Then the next communication is at page to take action on this. Statement of reasoning. From March 18th. Fortunate they come to Brian. I wanted to.
I think that if we're gonna be reviewing these, we come back and make some recommendations, because we are seeing some uptick in problems.
If there's objection, this will return to the C, giving them a also the date of the funding. Schedule. Communication is from teacher, with regard to budget. Citizens' comments, are there members of the public?
Use, non-citizen, on the minutes of the previous regular meeting, noted that planning commission. We are still in need of a planner. Other related items, I really wonder if we can do the next budgetary process. Grant special work, combining the two or something, but that's not gonna work. Or I just wanna concept so that historical preservation community. Itself. And another note regarding finishing the historical preservation plan, I talked to Councilman India, who said actually funds available from money to finish that off to your second about that, so he's going on. Because it's budgeting time coming right up. I also wanted to put the idea that getting the sales tax from power sales and increasing the so it should have a zero net impact on catch a little bit more revenue from the power that's supplied outside of the monthly line. Said budget increasing the pilot. Thing that I'd like to see is the target of 4% for the sales tax. Means 5% to pay a school bond. I think the bond's going to negatively and situation where they have to pay more.
A glorious 2 weeks that we've had here in Nome.
All know who you are.
Chuck Megan. Andrew knows me pretty well because walking out, he asked me how to sing. I appreciate that. But, yeah, this last 2 weeks has been just tremendous. We talked about things that we didn't know. Right? And from observation of yesterday, watching our school Mannix ball team today, watching the cheerleaders do their thing. Championship game was just watching when team got off the plane. See all the cars, all the emergency vehicles, not only there, and it was just a good feeling. And I hope the council will see some type of avenue to honor achievements from our school students. Just mentioned Seward's Day, seemed like we could have a Students' Day and somehow honor their achievements in sports and scholastics or whatever. I think it's about time that Nome has talked about getting more activities for the youth. Just honor them for what they have done in their disciplining themselves, to train themselves, to educate themselves. So, proclamation or whatever, honoring our. I'll figure out having a day to recognize our students.
Thank you. We will move on then. Page 2 and new business, resolution 20.
Service or where they request our service. Babcock. Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson. Councilmember Doug Johnson. Motion carried.
Mr. Morton. Trip across America and say tonight.
Ken Morton on behalf of NGU. missing just one type of meter. Installed just modern system. Hear more data. Emails that says Doug's power is must be cut off. So it's a number to call. Vander Wind Farm failed. Without that connection, we do not have the integration with their SCADA system. So you may have noticed that can't really govern them to work with their system. So we're looking at a couple. Reach on March 20th to a encounter with the utility pole. Was about that. This bullet here is submitted a grant application. Fund stations, our SCADA system, such that we have real-time awareness of what the fluid levels are. Plan.
Implications of price of fuel and resulting fuel surcharge.
Ask you that.
Something like that. That's why I beat you to the punch.
Price offered here a week or two ago as to what it would be if we locked in now. Which is higher than what we've seen. It's not something that we
Well, no. Another question, when do we typically see the change in the fuel surcharge?
Due to the averaging.
change in fuel prices further west that you go. There's 3 days. It's California, I think you're looking at $8 a gallon. To the west coast, market is
Clerk just sent out his greetings to public property owners. also have training for the Public Safety Advisory Commission. There have been a number of new members. Sam Severin is going to be up here next Monday, providing a work session for them, and hopefully all the members will attend. Resolution for your next meeting acknowledging April as Child Abuse Month.
Child prevention.
Prevention Month, excuse me. Mayor and I are going to be in Anchorage on your next meeting date, which is the 11th. And I know we want to bring to you soon the anticipated costs for the center and for this facility. So if you would be so grateful maybe to meet April 4th, and we'll have the training up at the that's everything for them to understand their responsibilities and Open Meetings Act, how the law expected of doing something, they do have rights, and making sure the Public Safety Advisory Commission understands that, and the role of the police department. So, with that, this is something that you created your Public Safety Advisory Commission, because I know when I first got here, I was attending meetings on that, the training meetings. We have new members, but we haven't had any training for at least 2 years now. The idea was every time a member would come on board, they would be trained, but with COVID in the middle of this, and we're filming the training so that we can have it here to train members when people come and go off the committee, but still maybe have every 2 years an entire training session to remind everybody. Council meet on the fourth and not meet on the. Okay. You know, obviously up to you. You know, get some direction, which you could give us at your meeting in April. Your seasonal sales tax is scheduled to go up. It does take time to get people to remember, it's time. Last 2 years, we started down this road, started, and then we have pure confusion. He has that topic to bring up, but, you know, just like the staff would like to get some direction, what you're thinking of. Give the notice where we say, you know, pass a, typically get budget projections for the midpoints. Expect it will happen in 2022. So that a lot of people are thinking sales tax revenue is going to dramatically, primarily up fuel and typically. Obviously, you know, we're going to have to take out each area without identifying too much where that's the source of revenue is. The one time we did it, we figured about $800,000. It's before we saw the hyperinflation. General, we see overall costs
Go ahead, Nikki.
And putting aside the project, and that would be it. There's no
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't really have anything within the report that that is worthwhile touching on with the exception of the attachment. Reflecting our presentation in general on the questions on the information we were putting out there, or if they have any ideas, some additional all we do is polish it up, and we're using it at a number of there are a variety of different levels. I do have one older item, just hearing that you're thinking of moving the other lemons up. The application scheduled to go to Brian on the 6th for the meeting on the 11th for council approval. So that for the, it's not going to be the 4th now. To get that in by Wednesday or Thursday. But we can on that meeting.
I think we'll probably be going that route, Joy, but if we need to get a special in there, we'll.
Okay, thank you.
Again, anybody? First time or second time?
Just like to echo Chuck's comment, Kenny Hughes, citizen. I just want to echo, I notice also what we can do and the recreational opportunities beyond just the hockey rink. Ideas are not yet, we're still implementing that. Back to some more
I saw this comments, new advancement of having it live on YouTube. But just a reminder that even watching on YouTube with the volume all the way up, it's hard to hear lots of people. There's comments on Facebook right now, people watching it that they can't hear. So there's no point in making all these advancements if we're not speaking to people participating.
Member Martin. Okay. Grants to the employees there. See. The team and the kids and the coaches and the tournament was well put on. Great. Big plans in the mix, obviously, for some big 30 of them in college. For them even more, so yeah. And then what I have is youth softball this summer. Just a comment. Fun stuff. Sit down. Member Tapcock.
I do really hope that we have a work session on elections sooner rather than later. I'd like to have ahead of the next election. Tribes too, I never like to make changes right ahead of an election. I like to do it far out. I think we're kind of heading towards that cusp and would be ideal. Were we gonna talk about Rochelle and then the Phoenix? Value in having recreational opportunities for our youth and young people. They're supporting first with that. And then broadcasting, that's also very much a concern. I'm grateful Danny brought that up. And Armin, and also not only just the sound issues, but ensuring that people have the ability to leave comments as well. Vaccinated or under, not old enough. I'm gonna do everything I can to protect them. Already asymptomatic, so just try to make sure that we can include as many voices as possible. Wednesday as an woman. Some of us consider to be a very questionable transaction between Russia and the US.
Brown.
Thank you for enlightening us a little bit on Seward's Day. It's something I had, quite frankly, never crossed my mind. Columbus Day, I was very aware of the negative issues to that. Basket Day, okay. Okay. It's important to be aware of the negative aspects of things as well as positive. But when I worked for Bering Straits Native Corp, we never celebrated Columbus Day. And when I was in July, I flippantly just reply that why would a native organization celebrate the invasion of the North American continent by Europeans? They've never connected with me on the Swords or Alaska Day. The whole team, obviously. I think everybody's along the same lines there. I don't think you'll get anybody that disagrees with that sentiment. The other teams that also tried really hard, other sports, and did their, put forth their 100% in their fields, deserve recognition as well. I always like to see the youth really get interested in things and put their heart and soul into whether it be sports or academics or debate. Cultural activity. Really hoping that make some progress on some positive election changes. I'm not change the rules back in the 70s or whenever it was to the way it is. I think it's time to take a fresh look at it with everything we know. Be a little more inclusive in the various boards that the city has. Also, think that an incentive program to stimulate construction of rental properties is something we should but whatever we can do to incentivize that would be great. Well,
Thank you. Doug Johnson.
Take up Doug's time. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, congratulations to the NNEP boys. It's a really big thing for the community. It's been like almost 40 years, and 40 years before that, when our last state tournament was won. So it's really a big accomplishment and really a really neat thing for the community. Getting support that's showing citizen involvement in something that affects kids, and I hope we take that to heart. Kids are growing up. I think there are at least 4 basketball hoops that they can go play on other playgrounds, and now I don't know if we have. So 4, maybe none. So I really appreciate that she took the time to do that and seek support. I think it was great. And it's good to see somebody get involved in doing that. To see the city settle with Bun Hardy, it's been several years going, and I'm hoping that she realizes that community stands by her. Heard several times about the microphone or having some type of way to put out our voices, and I know that we did some new system here. It doesn't work totally, and I know that other boardrooms that I've been at, where they have the individual microphones that they can click on and speak into, really helps get it out into the room. It's hard to hear back there when the air is coming out of the vents. You can't hear what we talk about up here. I guess we've already made the request to have a ordinance put forth with the reducing or waiving or having a sales tax holiday. I'm not sure which terminology. sales tax holiday to remove the 7% down to 5%. But I was kind of prepared to make, if we could do that, prepared recommendations. Why I would like to see it go forward is, I think Kenny Hughes brought up the fact that it lower and middle class population the most because they shop locally more, and it affects them. City government who's going to make out from the price of fuel. State is pretty giddy with thinking that they have all kinds of money because of the fuel increase. We're going to also see, city will also see the benefit of that from of that, but the city and the government will see the benefit of that, and so have that. Several businesses that have been in town for 30, 40, 50 years say that it's a cumbersome tax to collect, to switch back and forth. They'd rather just have one set sales tax throughout the year. That was a comment that several times when we looked at it before. And then from a city standpoint, I've got 3 years of audits, which we've increased our unassigned funds about $1 million each year. So we seem to be, and we have a policy in place that that we're supposed to maintain an unassigned fund balance according to the auditor equal to 10 to 50%. We're at 66%, so we're meeting our policy of maintaining that fund balance that we're supposed to maintain, and those are some of the arguments I make for let's go forward, and something that could be next step as well. I also like the idea that Scott's brought forward with incentives. I think that it's a positive thing for town, and will be the start of incentives for other type of things that we can assist with making the town better.
So a couple, I got obviously mentioned the basketball thing. The only cool thing, congratulations obviously, but I was trying to count the number of cars in the parade. I did it on Facebook, they were across from the gas station, and I lost count. It was, I was like, where's all the other cars in Nome? It was so long, it was so, 7 or 8 minutes, just the amount of all the cars that passed. Shows the community support. I mean, it's a huge accomplishment. I'm glad to see that the city is standing down the COVID Unified Command, and not that, it's good that we feel that COVID is manageable now, and city psychological standpoint is good. But we're getting back to positive message for the community. Much as I enjoy multi-hour conversations with Glenn, I'm going to assistant city manager position. We bring more things and we ask for more work, whether it be things like the alcohol issue, the housing issue, the elections issue. I think that it's important for city management to stay on top of these issues. And Glenn, it's certainly not a matter of not working hard. But I think from a succession standpoint and sort of an efficiency standpoint in getting things accomplished with all the information, I mean, we've got a clerk chief, we've got a deputy police chief. I believe the time is now where the city is getting to the point of managing all of these issues that we need to develop a system. I would also ask that we get on the accreditation issue, and I approve that. Public Safety Commission approve that, and just to make sure that. And I'm not saying it's not getting done. I'm sure there has progress. City Council receives regular updates on the accreditation. Sound issue continues to be an issue in terms of hearing things, so I don't know technically what this
I don't know if it's fixable or not, but it's a, desk microphone used to be a problem. And last, I think Drew, banker, I think that, it's helpful to have a banker in town that how does that work? And I think it's just really it makes it tougher because now we have to find another visitor center director.
Of our entire system that we have here. Ask them again to come up here and find out what. Really, just so you know, not only would I prefer as a city manager to have this working, I'd also like to see a system like this in a couple of our other facilities, which would allow working to the way that it work. So I just want everybody to know that we have had that backup here. We'll continue to bring. So people would start talking and forget the term. Eskimo community, and they have those type of mics, and I get scolded because I'm talking and nobody can hear. It's your mic right there. So up there. It's a little full. And see if
Didn't realize it was practically over my head. I'm assuming, I'm assuming I can be heard, even if I can't.
No, it's supposed to be directional. I mean,
Yeah.
correction.
and then I've got a few little things. Right as a whole letter. Work and needed user. Other things around here, but we certainly can talk about it. As far as and with regard to 2 points with regard to something as far as a special recognition, but we're going to wait until also the school board, as students of the month at their various for the individual schools, and I think to it as well, but that is
symposium that started together for the 11th and 12th in Anchorage. Opportunity to find out about the dollars and cents that are coming to availability through the infrastructure bill. Targeted over 5 years, so that Joy and Ken are all there at it. There's probably set up by the various agencies, so it's even oh, and on that note, then unless there's objection, two quick to get together on the congratulations to Brent Sass and the Dinner of 50. Search and rescue, the White Mountain Search and Rescue, they things are necessary and regard to the or sewer. Some reports of that just so that we can aggregate it. Tony or Ken a call on that. Back to everybody that participated in the big parade yesterday. Thank you for everybody that came together on short notice. Appreciate the police department and just getting excited about this great event. Instead of just planted, it would have been even bigger. But nobody can say that Nome did. Couple of weeks back, to present in front of the Finance Committee by skated through that presentation. I think we did it. Our need. Senate Finance Committee. Just forget about Seward's Day.
Not the city dictating this. It's
And finally, just to acknowledge with Bun Hartley has come to a close. That was a long, drawn out process. Lawyers. Solution that was negotiated with Ms. Hardy, and we set stuff in place so that say happy birthday to Nome on April. I think that's it. So we will ask session on matters of union negotiation. Councilmember Mark Johnson, Councilmember. Time is 8:18.
Friday, we didn't go out.